Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Marcella Paris, and as director of the Lewiston Public Library, I would like to welcome everyone to the Great Falls Forum. The forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of public policy, business, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This is the 24th season of the program, so we thank you for your ongoing support. A recording of today's program will be available starting tomorrow on the library's YouTube page. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. Please mark your calendar for the next Great Falls Forum program. Those of you who are new to the program, we actually skipped December, but we will be back in January, Thursday, January 20th at 12 noon, featuring a panel discussion on the topic Public Art in LA, Maine's Newest Canvas. More information will be available soon, again, at lplonline.org. So a little housekeeping for today's program. Those on Zoom will see a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. We'll be taking questions towards the end of the program, but you're welcome to enter any questions for our speaker today throughout the program, and she'll get to them towards the end. And for those joining us on Facebook Live, go ahead and type your questions there in the comments, and we will get them to the speaker. So today, I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker, Maine Representative Charlotte Warren. Representative Warren is serving her 4th term in the Maine House of Representatives. She has served for 5 years as the House Chair of the Legislature's Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. She previously served on the Judiciary Committee and is House Chair of Maine's Mental Health Working Group. Charlotte is a social worker and an educator. She is the owner and principal consultant of C. Warren Consulting Services. She served on the Hallowell City Council for 12 years, including 4 as mayor. Charlotte is a trustee of the Greater Augusta Utility District and a board member of the Family Violence Project. She earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Maine, Farmington, a master's degree in education from the University of Southern Maine, and a Master of Social Work degree from the University of New England. Perhaps most importantly, Charlotte lives in Hallowell with her best dog friends, Tissue and Tank. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Representative Charlotte Warren to the Great Falls Forum. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcella, and thank you to the Great Falls Forum for having me today. I'm happy to report that I've shipped Tissue and Tank off to a babysitter, so they won't be interrupting us today with their barking. So thank you all for being here. So in the description of today's event, we talk about how I am going to share a little bit about criminal justice reform in Maine, where we've been, where we are, and where we need to go. And specifically, I'll share some highlights, including a little bit about jails and prisons, some about Maine's drug war, and some about the fight to close the Long Creek Youth Development Center. And so what I am going to share with you is really my perspective of the journey. And my perspective of this journey began in 2015 when I was appointed to the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee by then Speaker Mark Eves. And I also at that point was appointed to the committee that I thought I wanted most, which was the Judiciary Committee. And the reason I thought I wanted the Judiciary Committee most is because it really seemed to align with what I wanted to work on. Issues around civil rights and reproductive freedom, etc. But it took me about 3 weeks of being on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee before I realized that that was really where I needed to be and really where I planned to stay. I have now served on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee for 7 years. I've served as the House Chair for 5 years. And everything that I've sort of wanted to work on and have been trained to work on around social justice issues is sort of magnified and much more urgent in the criminal justice system. So let me tell you a little bit about what the criminal legal system is. What does it mean? So when we're talking about the criminal legal system, we're really talking about three parts. We're talking about law enforcement, right? Which might be your municipal law enforcement officers, state police, and sheriffs. And then we're talking about courts. And when I talk about courts, I'm really talking about judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. And we're talking about jails and prisons, right? It's those three parts: law enforcement, courts, and jails and prisons, which make up what we refer to as the criminal legal system. And before we start, I wanted to share with you a quote from a book that I highly recommend. I've recently been in a book group focused on this book. It is called Until We Reckon: Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. It is written by Danielle Sered. And here's a quote to start us off. If incarceration worked to secure safety, we would be the safest nation in all of human history. We would not be a nation where, by the most conservative estimates, every year, nearly 3,000 young men of color are murdered before their 25th birthday. More than 57,000 children survive sexual violence. Nearly 500,000 women are beaten in their relationships. Nearly 3 million men are robbed or assaulted. Countless transgender people are killed for who they are. And where every year we bury our own children gunned down in our own streets. If incarceration worked to stop violence, we would have eradicated it by now, because no nation has used incarceration more. In all of the world and in all recorded time, no country has locked up their own people at the rate that we do. The United States has nearly 5% of the world's population and nearly 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Again, that's a quote from Danielle Sered's book, Until We Reckon: Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. I believe that mass incarceration is the civil rights issue of our time. So let's start there. And let's start in Maine. In Maine right now, each year we spend about $300 million locking people up. So that's about $200 million per year in our Department of Corrections. Those are state prisons, and about $100 million a year in our local county jails. That's $100 million a year. In our county jails, over 80% of the folks serving time are on a psychotropic medication. So that means that over 80% of the folks that are locked up in our county jails are on medication because they're suffering from a mental health crisis. Now, why do I start talking about this issue from a budget perspective? Well, I believe that budgets are moral documents. And in Maine, the more that we spend money on jails and prisons and locking people up that need help, the less money we have to actually provide the help that people require. And that's what seems to happen at the end of each legislative session, when we have trouble saying no to more money to police and prisons and jails, and therefore we don't have the money left over for taking care of people way sort of before they need prisons and jails as an intervening system. If we could help people when they first started exhibiting either symptoms of their mental illness, or if folks had an opportunity to go to a therapist, a crisis worker, when they started realizing that their substance use was getting out of hand. Those are systems that we don't have. And because we don't have them there for folks to go and access them, we wait until the very end, until that person's behavior has become so socially unacceptable. We then force treatment. We force treatment by locking people up, putting them in drug courts. We spend millions of dollars when we could have instead helped them at the beginning of the problem. So let's talk about a couple of issues around jails and prisons. Right now, we know that in Penobscot County Jail has had a overcrowding issue for a very long time, consistently for years. Now, the county commissioners are proposing that they will use their ARPA funds. So as you all know, the state received our American Rescue Funds from the federal government after COVID. Well, we'd like to say after COVID, it isn't really after COVID, but states received federal money, municipalities received federal money, and counties received federal money. And that money is really supposed to help people in our communities, businesses, nonprofits, our very constituents recover from what happened to them during COVID. And now what Penobscot County is looking for as a solution is to spend a large portion of their millions of dollars that they received to build 100 new jail beds, to build 100 new jail beds up at Penobscot County. And then as an afterthought, they'll also put some money towards treatment and mental health. I met with the Commissioner of Corrections 2 days ago. There are anywhere from 600 to 700 empty jail beds across the system. If we could figure out a way to get our county jails to work together and to board out some of those inmates that are currently in Penobscot, or if we actually use the federal funding to give people what they need so they don't end up in county jails. The Sheriff Troy Morton, someone who I have so much respect for, is basically standing on the top of his jail, yelling into the wind about what huge issues he has up there with mental health issues. And there just isn't enough support in the community. So if you're interested in getting involved in a real live issue that's happening right now, we are working, a group of us, to block the building of any more jail beds, block the building of more jail beds up at Penobscot County. Ask for the federal money that has come in from COVID as a way to help people that were affected by COVID. Build what we need. Build treatment, build mental health facilities. Additionally, let's switch to Long Creek. You've probably heard a lot about the Long Creek Youth Development Center. Now, this is a state-owned prison. Long Creek Youth Development Center is the only youth prison left in the state. Long Creek Youth Development Center, I'm going to refer to it from now on as Long Creek in this talk, was originally built for 200 plus children. There are under 40 youth in there right now. We spend $18.5 million per year per youth. Excuse me. We spend $18.5 million per year on Long Creek. Since we have such a low census of children in there right now, that math comes out to over $500,000 per child per year locked up in Long Creek. A handful of the youth that are locked up in Long Creek are simply there because they have mental health needs that we have no place in the state to solve. We have no place for them to go. They need a mental health bed. They need support. They are not safe to themselves. They are not safe to be with their families. We don't have enough resource to serve them, so they are sitting in our state prison for youth, which is called Long Creek. We are working to try to get the state government to fund what we actually need. Fund mental health beds for these children. We send a lot of youth that are struggling with mental health issues, we send them out of the state as well. That costs us millions of dollars. That's not included in the $18.5 million that we spend per year on Long Creek. Now, I know the question is going to come up, so I want to answer it right here. Yes, we are always going to need secure facility for youth in this state. What I mean by that is there will always be a small number of youth who, for their own safety or the safety of our communities, require a secure facility. But that secure facility does not and should not be a facility that was originally built for over 200 plus youth. As you might imagine, regardless of if you are trying to punish someone with solitary confinement or not, when you have that small of a number of kids in a prison that's that large, kids are in solitary confinement for large hours of the day. We have seen them react to that. We have seen a lot of unrest recently at Long Creek. We are asking this administration, and it really is about this administration. It really is about Governor Mills. We are asking Governor Mills to announce a date of when she will close Long Creek, get the remaining children into smaller, secure facilities. Smaller, secure facilities do much better at actually rehabilitating children and adults. Now, let's remember what we say our goal is. What we often think of when, if you're not really paying attention to jails and prisons, you can kind of think, okay, this person did something bad, or maybe they did something that's socially unacceptable as a result of their mental health or whatever, and we're just going to send them away. We're just going to put them away, and that's going to protect our public safety. Over 93% of the people we send away to prisons and jails will return to our communities. So we have a decision to make. Do you want to correct them? Do you want to fix the behavior? Or do you just want to punish them? Remember that we call it corrections for a reason. And if the goal is to correct, we need to make sure that the places where we are locking up these youth, the small number that need secure confinement, we're also making sure that we are doing corrections, that we are helping them. That's a little bit about Long Creek. I'm sure I'm going to get questions about it. So let me move on to the drug war. In Maine, right now, we are losing 12 people a week to overdose death. And let me say that again. In Maine, right now, we are losing 12 people a week to a totally preventable death overdose from drugs. We don't have enough services for these folks. And while we do a lot of talking about how we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem, we still have a state government that is really focused on trying to arrest our way out of this problem. We spend millions of dollars on Maine drug enforcement agents that arrest people and take them out of our communities and lock them up and send them to places where they're not getting help, and they cycle back out over and over and over. We do the same thing with the mental health issues that we have, but we've started to see that shift. Remember a few minutes ago, I mentioned that Penobscot County Sheriff Troy Morton, spends a lot of time talking about how the folks that are locked up in his jail shouldn't be there. Yes, they committed a crime. Yes, they stole a candy bar. Yes, they urinated in public. Yes, they, slept in the library. Whatever those examples of the crime that they committed, crimes of poverty, crimes of houselessness. But what he's saying is those issues are caused by their mental illness. He is begging us as a state to help those people as opposed to just bringing them to his door at his jail, right? Just bringing him. What he is not allowed to do is say no. And a lot of sheriffs are saying that. Please help us. Please put money into mental health services. It's become sort of pretty accepted that we should not be locking up people that are struggling with mental health issues. What we're still struggling to get behind is that substance use disorder is a disease. Substance use disorder is caused by trauma and pain, and substance use disorder needs to be treated, not punished. Another terrific book I will recommend to you if you are interested in the drug war is called Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari. And Chasing the Scream is a history of America's drug war. And one of the quotes that is used over and over and over is by Johann Hari. And he says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. So the opposite of substance use disorder is connection, is what we have, right? It's a home, it's food, it's heat, it's a job, it's family, it's community. It's what makes us feel connected. It's what allows us to deal with the pain and the trauma that we've either experienced earlier in our lives or are experiencing now. What we do currently is opposite to connection. What we do is we take people out from their communities, we take them away from their families and their jobs and their pets and their warmth and their home, and we put them in a small cell. That is the opposite of what we should be doing. I've toured a lot of correctional facilities, and I know that many of you have seen a lot of them on television. And I'm here to tell you that they are just as loud, steel on steel, banging doors that you've seen on television. They are places that re-traumatize and stigmatize folks who are dealing with the disease and who need our help. Now, you might be able to just say, oh, Charlotte Warren, she's just a lefty, she's soft on crime. But remember what I started this conversation with. Not only is it the wrong thing to do, to my mind, as far as morally, it is the most expensive thing to do. Locking people up for mental health disorders and for substance use disorders is ineffective, and it's the most expensive thing. And if we actually want to solve the issue, we're spending all the money on the thing that doesn't work. Let me talk to you a little bit about jails and prisons. One of the things that we have seen change in Maine is that folks are really starting to pay attention to the fact that we're spending a lot of money on jails and prisons, and they aren't seeing sort of, I guess, what they would expect for results. So let me tell you a couple of pieces of data about that. We are in our 8th year in Maine where we've watched the crime level and this is national statistics that our local law enforcement report in, and the Justice Department reports back to us. We are in the 8th year, soon to be 9th year, of a considerable drop in crime year after year after year after year. We, the state of Maine, we compete with the state of Vermont as the safest states in the nation. We sort of switch, we go back and forth. And yet, each year over those 8 years, we've incarcerated more and more and more people. So how does that make sense? If we think that we're locking people up because of crime, but the crime level isn't in Maine staying the same, but it's continuing to drop, and we're one of the safest states in the nation. In fact, we keep competing with Vermont. First, we're the safest, then they're the safest. Why do we keep seeing our incarceration rates go up? What it tracks with is the opioid epidemic in our state. What it tracks with is the alcohol use disorder rates in our state. We don't talk a lot about alcohol use when we're talking about drugs, right? But it also is a large problem. We should be investing dollars into helping people so they have a place to go to when they realize that maybe their wine drinking is getting a little bit out of hand. We don't do that. There are not those resources. Now, there are resources for many of us who have health insurance, right? There are places for us to go. But for a large percentage of people, we don't fund. And the reason we don't fund, again, is because we spend so much of our money on locking people up. Remember that quote by Danielle Searad. If incarceration worked to secure safety, we would be the safest nation in all of human history. Very important to think about. Also, one of the pieces that I referenced at the beginning of this talk was courts. Courts are a part of the criminal legal system. And courts include the judges. We all know who judges are, right? They sit at the front of the courtroom and they listen, and then they hand down sentences. They tell you how much you have to pay, how much you have to serve, etc. And then we have prosecutors. Prosecutors are often referred to as district attorneys. District attorneys or prosecutors have a lot of power in this state, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking of them. Did you know that prosecutors are elected? And did you know that next year, November 2022, every prosecutor in Maine will be up for re-election? I think that that's something we should spend more time paying attention to. No matter what the laws are on the books, right? So in Maine, we in the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, we pass laws that sort of say how much time you have to do if you beat somebody up or steal a donut, right? But the prosecutors, they have all the power in making decisions about if they're going to prosecute a person, if they're going to ask for treatment, if they're going to give them a deferred disposition, which just means I'm going to keep track of you for a year. I'm going to ask you to go get treatment. We're going to ask that you don't do this, this, or this. And in a year, or maybe another time, but let's just use this as an example. In a year, we're going to meet again, and we're going to look at everything we asked you to do. And if you met all of those goals, then we're going to let you off on this one, right? They have a lot of power. So just really be paying attention. Another place that I'm starting to spend a little more time is actually going into our courtrooms. Interestingly, we in Maine, and especially those of us who are working on criminal justice reform, we've really left the courtrooms really as a place just for folks with law degrees, right? Unless you're the one being charged with something. Check out your local courtroom someday. I've been doing that lately here in Kennebec County. And I've been watching as person after person comes up to the stand and is being arraigned. Many of the arraignments, that's sort of the first time you end up in court. Many of the arraignments are clearly having to do with substance use disorder and alcohol use disorder. And I've been paying attention to what is the assistant district attorney. So remember, the prosecutors, they're in the courtroom asking for charges, asking for bail. I've been really paying attention to what's actually happening in those courtrooms. I can tell you that I've watched at this point over 100 cases, and I've never heard the word treatment mentioned. I've never heard the word treatment mentioned. So a bunch of us are starting to think about, how do we put community back in the courtroom? One of the things that we need to do is pay attention to the elections of our district attorneys coming up. And another thing we need to do is start spending some time in the courtrooms. What we hear over and over is, no, 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 we are not arresting folks who have substance use disorder. We're only arresting folks who are trafficking. You go spend a little time in your courtroom and you tell me what you see. These are different ways that all of us can get involved in the criminal justice system. One of the things I'd like to do now is we have a resource sheet that I made, and I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes, and Marcella has the resource sheet and she'll put it up. This is so important for all of you, just to provide an opportunity if you are interested in getting involved in this work. And I want to tell you a little bit about these organizations. Now, these are not the only organizations, but these are some of the organizations that I work with. Obviously, I'm not an organization. I put that on there because I want you to know that you are welcome to reach out to me if you are interested in getting involved in the work that I've talked about today. My email address is there. My Facebook page is there. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram. But let's start with talking about the organizations here that you can get involved in. If you're interested in the drug war, if you're interested in fighting to make sure that the state of Maine is using their dollars more towards treatment than locking folks up who have substance use disorder, then you really want to check out the Recovery Advocacy Project. The Recovery Advocacy Project in Maine is run by a young woman who's in long-term recovery. Her name is Courtney Allen. She is also a at-large city councilor in Augusta. They have changed the conversation in the legislature around drug sentencing reform. Secondly is the Maine Prisoner Reentry Network. The Maine Prisoner Reentry Network, under the leadership of Bruce Nodden and Peter Lehman and lots of other folks, they are really working to make sure that folks have the resources that they need when they get out of jail and when they get out of prison. So I wouldn't have known this, except that I've spent so many years working on this issue. There are so many things that change so fast in our country, in our state, in our communities when you've been locked away. Even when you've been locked away for just a year, right? We say just a year. But when you're returning to your community, there are so many things that you need to know. The Maine Prisoner Reentry Network is a great organization that is bringing together community groups to support folks who are returning. to support folks with everything they need. That's just a great place to get involved. The Maine Youth Justice, you can see them here. They're leading the fight to close Long Creek, which is the youth prison. I've put their Facebook page. They're also a great place to check out. That group is made up of many previously incarcerated youth that instead of being angry, well, they are angry. Let me not say it that way. In addition to being angry about what happened to them, they're turning their anger into reform. And they are creating social justice here in Maine. And they're an unbelievable group, Maine Youth Justice. The Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition, this is led by Joseph Jackson and Jan Collins, two real leaders in Maine, both with very intimate experience with incarceration. Joseph was incarcerated within the Department of Corrections for 2 decades. Jan Collins is the daughter of an incarcerated father and the mother of an incarcerated son. This group is doing so much work at the state legislature, but also so much inside the walls of Maine state prisons and jails. The ACLU of Maine, this is get on their newsletter list, check them out, their Facebook page. They will keep you linked into, I didn't even talk with you about bail reform. That is a large issue. We were finally able this year in Maine to make a tiny itty bitty bit of reform around cash bail reform, blocking the ability to require cash bail for the lowest level crime, misdemeanor, Class E crimes. We need to make much bigger reforms. Many people are sitting in jail before they've even been adjudicated. So what I mean is they have not even had a court date to deem if they are guilty or innocent. They are still innocent, but they are sitting in our jails because they can't afford their bail, and you are paying for them. You're paying for all of their medical treatment. You're paying for their 3 square meals a day, etc. We need that reform big time. ACLU of Maine is leading that discussion. So we're at 12:37, and I all day have been making a commitment to myself that I would not talk too long, and I would make sure you could ask questions. And so I'm going to stop. And let's get into the questions that you have.
So it looks like we have a bunch of questions coming in, but I just want to encourage folks to continue to type more questions, and we'll see what we can get to by the end of the program. So the first one here, do we expect any vetoes of important legislation during this new session? And if so, what can we do about it?
That's a wonderful question. Let's see, we've got some bills that we carried over that are very important to criminal justice reform efforts. And based on our track record, I think we probably can expect some vetoes. One of the bills that I'd really like you to be paying attention to is 1175, LD 1175. It's a bill to change how much money jails and prisons can charge residents to use their phone system. So if you are interested in this issue, do a little bit of research. It's not just a national issue, it's an issue here in Maine, where very short calls to loved ones on the inside of our jails and prisons are costing astronomical prices to Maine taxpayers. I see it as a double taxation issue. Our prisons and jails are paid for by those same residents, and then to talk to their loved ones, they're paying, it's just a ridiculous amount of money. And part of that is because our contracts, both from individual jails and the DOC, the contracts with these vendors who provide the phone systems are for profit. And so we are charging families a lot of money. The best way to help people with that goal, remember we talked about the goal of correction is connection. And when we're talking about folks who are incarcerated, we need to be making sure that they're connected to their families. And having exorbitant prices to talk on the phone to your loved ones is taking us in the wrong direction. Also, children really need to be connecting with their parents who are incarcerated. The research shows that we greatly increase the risk of children to later in life have issues with substance use disorder when they've had the adverse childhood experience of a parent who's incarcerated. So that's a really important issue. I'm not sure where the governor will stand on that. I hope that we can get to an agreement. We've not been successful around other other pieces of legislation that the governor has vetoed, as I talked about with Long Creek. That's one piece. Another piece that we'll be working on is a bill to ban solitary confinement in Maine. And it has some guardrails on it. Obviously there are times when folks need to be sort of just like all of us, right? Humans, this is real stuff, right? Taken out of the general population. But solitary confinement is defined in a certain way and really needs to be regulated. We have a problem with that here in Maine. The Bangor Daily News has done a great job at exposing what's happening in our prison system. We have a bill to ban solitary confinement in Maine. That will be interesting. So those are two really important bills. I know that there are more. So check with some of these organizations, get on their newsletters, and you'll be learning about when those public hearings are coming and when those work sessions are coming.
We have another question. Hi, Representative Warren. Thank you for sharing your time and voice with this forum. My question to you is, why don't we have another place like Riverview for those going through addiction?
It's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. It's something that I'm struggling with because we keep putting our money into prisons. So let's put jails aside for a second. Jails are county, right? So let's focus on prisons. We actually use the Maine State Prison to house some folks who have not committed crimes, who are profoundly mentally ill. We've created in our Maine State Prison something that's called the Intensive Mental Health Unit, the IMHU, and it is a sort of partnership with Riverview where patients kind of go back and forth because we know we always have too many folks for how many we can serve at Riverview, and we always have too many folks for how many we can serve at the Intensive Mental Health Unit. I believe our cap there is 28 individuals. Similarly to what I said about youth, we also send adults with severe and persistent mental illness, mostly psychotic behavior, etc. We send them out of state because we don't have beds for them. I think Sheriff Troy Morton is asking that same question. I did say earlier, he's standing on the roof of Penobscot County Jail and screaming into the wind. He is trying so hard to bring attention to this issue that we do not have enough residential beds for folks who are struggling with mental health. And let's just back up a little, because the answer isn't always residential beds. And I don't want to make that mistake or lead you down into that direction. Really what we need is to keep money in our communities and support community-based mental health. Remember that one of the things that I said, one of my favorite quotes, Johann Hari, the opposite of addiction is connection. Well, connection is the key for so many of society's ills, right? One of the things that keeps us going every day is our job and our family and our home and our food and our warmth, right? All of the regular things, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Well, also when you pull somebody out of their community to send them to a facility like Riverview or Dorothea Dix, you're also removing them from that connection, right? So we do have already in the state of Maine, they're called crisis stabilization units. You drive by them in communities, you don't even know they are there. They look like regular houses. They're residential beds. They're a place for people to go, to stay short-term, to get support. It's a similar model to what we're trying to get to for youth. It's when people need a timeout. The other thing that can happen around community-based supports is some people just need a chair. They don't need a bed. In Maine, we only allow 3 people, 3 entities, I should say, to respond when there's a 911 call. When there's a 911 call, either police can respond, they can dispatch fire, rescue, ambulance, right? 3 places. We are working very hard to get crisis as a response option. Someone like me who's trained as a social worker, who can maybe sit with somebody on a sidewalk. What's going on with you today? Let's talk about what's happening. Let's talk about what's making a plan together, right? Some people need de-escalation and stabilization right then. They don't need to be approached by a law enforcement officer who's doing the best that they can, but whose tools are not meant for folks who are struggling with substance use disorder or with mental health disorders. Walking up to somebody who's in a mental health crisis with your arms out to get them is not going to de-escalate. It is going to escalate. So I led into a lot of different parts of that question, but we need more places that can serve people who are struggling with mental health issues. I wouldn't say more Riverviews are necessarily the way, but we need more. And in order to those are sort of upstream, right? I would think of those as upstream responses. We need to put our money into more of those responses as opposed to Riverview and prisons. And as long as we're putting money way downstream, we won't be able to afford those upstream solutions.
As a next question, what alternatives exist for kids who are in Long Creek currently, but are unsafe to themselves, their family, and community?
Thank you so much for asking that question. One of the things that's most frustrating to us right now that are working on the issue of trying to make some change with Long Creek and asking this administration to give us a closure date is we have empty behavioral health beds right now in Maine. So here's the deal. We have youth that are sitting in Long Creek because there's no place for them. They need a mental health bed. That's sort of how I refer to them, behavioral health residential placement. And we also have in the Department of Health and Human Services a bunch of beds that are sitting empty. Now, that to me is a bureaucratic quagmire, right? Empty beds, kids who need them, we're not matching them up. One of the things that we don't have in Maine that's a real problem is on the DHHS side, the Health and Human Services side, we do not have any no reject, no eject. And we absolutely need that. What I mean by no reject, no eject is the Department of Health and Human Services is funding all of these residential beds for youth who have issues with mental health struggles. But if they've been involved in the criminal justice system, lots of these beds won't take them. So that's a theme that we see across the system. We don't provide supports. People will get louder and louder and louder until they have their needs met. At some point, that being loud about their mental health distress will become socially unacceptable and will land those people into the criminal legal system. And then often once they are in the criminal legal system, these systems over here, the systems that failed to be there when they needed them, these systems will no longer take them. That's an issue that we have in Maine right now. Again, empty behavioral health beds, kids sitting in Long Creek with no place to go. We need to make sure that these beds over here that are funded by the Department of Health and Human Services, that we have beds that are funded where the practitioners are not allowed to say, we won't take those kids. We'll only take these other kids. It's causing a real bottleneck.
In addition to petitioning the governor to change her decisions, what power centers should we be appealing to or influencing to allow good reform to succeed?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you so much for it. I have to tell you that you all have way more power than the governor does or the legislature does. I can't tell you from my perspective of, so this is my 21st year of being elected. So as Marcella told you before, I spent 12 years on the Hallowell City Council, and I was 4 years as mayor, and now I'm a legislator. So 21 years of this vantage point of being elected and sort of looking out at my constituents and the folks that I serve and other people's constituents. And what I can tell you is that you all have all of the power. You just have to start using it. When I see things change in the state legislature, it isn't because we changed the governor's mind. It isn't because I sat down and had another cup of coffee with another senator, right? Or went to another lunch with another representative. It was because you all started getting louder. What you all need to do is really start letting your elected representatives, your elected senators, your governor, let them know that the days of this tough on crime, that's over. The jig is up, right? You have the data now. You understand that crime in Maine has gone down year after year after year after year, and incarceration is going up, and we're spending $300 million a year on prisons and jails and $100 million a year on law enforcement, except we're still losing 12 people a week to overdose death. And 80+% of people that are locked up are on psychotropic medications. You have the data, you know the facts. So you need to start communicating with your elected people and saying to them, you want upstream solutions funded. So let me tell you just quickly, why do I say upstream and downstream? And I'll give you this as just a very quick story because I know we're close to the end of our time. Anybody who goes to social work school, and I'm one of those people who went to social work school, one of the first things you learn about, hear about, is the parable of upstream and downstream. And definitely your professor is going to share this story with you. And they're going to share the story of the people standing on the side of the river, and they see a baby floating down in the water, and they run out to the water and they pull out the baby. And then they see another baby and they run out to the water and they get the baby and they pull it in. And then, oh my goodness, there's another baby floating down, and they run out and they save the baby. And one person, the social worker, starts heading up. And everyone goes, where are you going? We need your help. Where are you going? And the social worker says, I'm going up there to find out who's throwing the babies in the water. And that's what we need to do. We need to get up there to the systems issues, changing upstream solutions, funding mental health, community-based mental health, helping people who are struggling with substance use disorder. We need to start changing the systems, shifting money away from the downstreams after the babies are already in the water.
We have a comment coming in from Facebook that mentions another potential resource is the Connecting with Opportunities grant, which provides workforce services for people who have been impacted by the opioid crisis. I don't know if you want to chat about that a minute.
I do. Thank you so much. That's my good friend, Doug Dunbar. And Doug is also somebody who is very public about his experience with incarceration. Doug was employed by Maine state government, was a communications director in the Baldacci administration, and had a substance use disorder that landed him in jail, unfortunately. He was not helped. Instead, he was incarcerated. From that experience, he has become just an unbelievable champion here in Maine. And he is part of this program. And this program is really amazing. If you want to learn more about it, just Google. I think the best thing to do is to Google, Connecting to Opportunities, Google Doug Dunbar's name, reach out to me. If you know someone in your community, if you are someone in our community who has been affected by the opioid epidemic, the epidemic that is killing 12 people a week, and we aren't talking about the epidemic that we do not see Dr. Shaw and Governor Mills coming out at 2 o'clock on our public radio and television stations and talking about. Doug Dunbar is doing that work. They can provide a lot of resource support for folks, a lot of workforce support, really an important program. So thank you so much for mentioning that one.
I think we may have time to squeeze in one more question here. We have somebody commenting, I was astounded that deaths from overdoses increased in Maine this last year, and yet there's been a dramatic increase in the availability of treatment for substance abuse. Why the disconnect?
Well, first of all, we may see an increase in treatment, but it is nothing compared to what we need. So that's the first thing. And I'm very thankful that we are seeing an increase in treatment. And the other thing that I say to a lot of folks is, as long as we continue to create the shame and the stigma around substance use disorder that we do through incarceration and through using our police officers as responders instead of doctors, we can just keep on funding treatment. But if we're making accessing that treatment, or even knowing that you need to access that treatment, shameful and stigmatizing, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. What we need to do is get away from this drug war. A drug war is not a war on drugs. You cannot have a war on an inanimate object. It's a war on people. I've lost a bunch of my friends. I've lost family members, and I've known these people. I know what their journey was. And I know that when you get pulled in to the criminal justice system, the shame and the stigma that gets added to your already present trauma and already present struggle that you have, it makes it so much harder to get help. What we need to do, in addition to putting more money into treatment, we need to end the war. It's time for a peace treaty. We need to provide people with the love and support that they need for their disease called substance use disorder. Very involved in this work. If you are interested in joining this work, obviously the Recovery Advocacy Project, but please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is there. You can find me on Facebook. Thank you so much for that question.
It looks like we are just about at time. So I want to thank you again, Representative Warren, for joining us today. I apologize. I think it looks like we've got another 5 questions that are in the Q&A box here that unfortunately we were unable to get to, but I'm sure Representative Warren would be willing to answer those questions if you wanted to send her an email.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, and thank you to all who joined us today. As a reminder, the recording will be available later on Facebook today and on the library's YouTube channel starting tomorrow. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.